Right, I'd like to welcome you all here to Crewe for this historic meeting of our 7 different parties from all over the country, not just England, Wales, but Wales and Scotland as well. And so it's wonderful to see you all, and thanks for coming such long distances. It's much appreciated. And we now move to our first speaker, which is Dr. Teck, Khong, who is the former of the founder of the Belmont Accord. Teck.
Thank you very much, Brian. I apologise for my late arrival and all this messing about. As I drove out of the house, 2 miles down the road, my front suspension decided to break. So I had to limp back, and I came in, drove in Linda's car. So better late than never, let's say. As Brian has mentioned, it's so pleasing to see you all here today. We had a very slow start. The Alliance for Democracy and Freedom, founded by 4 very good and honourable veteran politicians, Michael Khong, Annie Warrender, Keith Lonsdale, and Paul Goldring. They had a vision. They had a vision that, first of all, the new party had to reflect the wishes of the British people, because they have seen that over the previous 3 general elections, the country was deviating further and further into a very unsavoury decline. And Paul, unfortunately, who couldn't be here, was going to talk about how there is no party that the British people can trust anymore. Unfortunately, Paul can't join us because of a family bereavement, and I'm sure our sympathies go out to him. He's lost his daughter, his eldest daughter, a couple of weeks ago. So Paul is at home. Anyway, back to ADF, the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. Mike eschewed the use of the word party in the registration with the Electoral Commission, hoping to draw on various patriots, small parties, independent candidates from up and down the country to join in a crusade to see the revival of patriotism in this country, and also to safeguard British values, which are so precious to so many people. Fast forward, we had a difficult time really. We didn't fast forward very much, because the party was registered in August of 2020, right bang in the middle of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. So we were going to launch with a fanfare, but everything was muted. In the following year, I said to Mike, we should pursue our mission. I think the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom is a very lengthy title for what is actually a very sound movement. So why not let's invite various people to get the support, and most of all, I think if people were fervent in a desire to pursue a British ideal, people would see the difficulties that we have and come together. So we invited UKIP, we invited Reclaim, we invited Reform, David Curtin's party, Heritage, and SDP. We invited a lot of people. The time turned up. Reclaim was going to attend, but Lawrence said his car broke down on the way. We didn't get a response from David when I invited him to send his deputy. So we carried on. Regardless, we had a declaration signed in absentia by the Time Party, which eventually merged later that year. We had Freedom Alliance come to talk to us. Jonathan Tilt, the former leader, was on the verge of merging with us. But things took a back seat. Anyway, last year we decided to give it one more resuscitation, as it were. And we got together in Bromyard, and Catherine was there. Do you know who else? Well, we had Libertarian. UKIP didn't turn up. We had Jeremy Moss representing English Democrats. Jeremy. So we signed an agreement last year, in April last year, where we agreed to field 35 candidates, obviously fighting 35 seats up and down the country. So that was a victory in itself. We were able to get a feeling of common purpose, excuse the expression, but we were determined to show our force, and we hope that the British people saw that there was an alternative to reform, which was galloping away with popularity and in opinion polls. But we are honest, we are not funded by rich, big money, big benefactors, although we have a very kind gentleman here amongst our midst today. And we decided to gather more and more people. So we had Brian join us. We have, as I mentioned, Brian, who set up the Crewe first, Catherine, and then we had Russell, who's in here, Russell White of the Populist Party. We have Robin Tilbrook from the English Democrats, and we are today joined by National Housing Party UK. I think Pat is coming to
he's on as well
with us.
Surely.
So we're here today. We are, if you notice, quite a lot older than the average citizen on the street, but that's because I think we are very ambitious in our desire to see a revival of, as I mentioned, the British spirit. We need to get younger people involved. We need to get more ladies involved. But I'm sure we are on the right path. I think, although we are full of enthusiasm, replete with experience, we are unfortunately a bit pecunious in funds, so we need fundraising, and I think that should be very much something which we'll take up in our campaign. So what makes me think that we as a group are going to be successful, and I think we are, what we need to do is to focus on solutions, because there's an awful lot of talk, a lot of complaint out there. People saying, oh, we have too many illegal immigrants coming in, taxation is too high, we're getting... A lot of these things, as a small group, even though we are now 7, we don't have the wherewithal to change things. We certainly have we don't figure at all in geopolitics. So what I suggest is we connect with local people, we connect with the community, and we offer solutions. We can actually start working solutions. Now, I know you might think, coming from a health background, I'm biased, but there is a real possibility of doing something if we all pool together our resources. Now, one of the things we find more and more on the streets, in clubs and pubs where we hear people speak, is the poor access to your GP. Okay? And you might think health is actually configured nationally in Parliament. Legislation is passed, the Health and Care Act, for example, 2022, devolve a lot of the capital spend to integrated care boards. How do we do that? So, in my experience, for example, I've been looking at health policy from when I was a Conservative parliamentary candidate. I set up the Policy Forum on Health with Andrew Lansley. In this new era, what we have is integrated care boards where the people's representative in the form of councillors sit alongside NHS representatives and decide local policies. So when I was on the board in 2011 to 2015, we were on the boards with councillors. Now I can tell you, the majority of councillors who attend board meetings, in those days it was CCG meetings, they were not actively involved in guiding the policy. They were very interested in actually So the councillors who attended joint meetings were very passive, and the NHS representative, the NHS side, were literally rubber stamping what came down from Whitehall. So here's a chance with the devolution of care budgets to the 42 integrated care boards the government has set up. What we need to do is to get councillors elected onto their local councils and start influencing policy. And I'll show you in a short time from now how that can be done. We're here today now, we've got a full complement. Despite our differences, important as they may be in terms of how we address different types of issues in the community at large, we have a common enemy. The common enemy comes in the form of globalists. Okay, so you have globalist organizations, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and rich individuals, powerful rich individuals. You probably know the likes of Bill Gates and so on. So they form an axis of what I would call perverse influence on our society. And together, if we unite the people out in the community against these forces, we can win. When I say we go local, it is very important to remember, I mean, there's the people like Advance, for example, they're not quite registered as a political party, but Ben wants to be in Parliament. What he doesn't remember is Parliament doesn't sit on nothing. It has to be built on the foundation of local support, and that starts with councillors. So going forward in 2026, the 7th of May, I would like to see as many of you as possible sending representatives to win councils. Now, we're not going to do it randomly because our 7 parties across the United Kingdom is very thinly spread. To actually influence health, to see how we can serve the people, to show them that we mean what we set out to do, we should start targeting areas where we can start winning control. So, for example, in Nottinghamshire, there are 66 council seats. We don't need to win all 66 seats. If we win 34, 35, we are there. Because we will then make the right noises and start changing things. Okay? When I was heading the campaign for the Conservative Association in Harborough, I brought out all my patients and I added an extra 10,000 to Sir Edward Garnier's normally 6,000 to 9,000 majority. He'd been in 3 terms. So what it is I also then set about ensuring that the Conservative increased the footprint in the council. So we went from 2 councillors and I got 4 more councillors. So 6 out of 28. But it was insufficient. I kept a very quiet position. I just observed because even though all 6 Conservative and 2 Labour councillors voted, I couldn't get anything passed because the other 20 Lib Dems kept getting their way through. So what we need to do is to control a council and do something that we can show the public we mean what we say. So, for example, although housing of immigrants is dictated from the government, and if we object too heavily, we could be seeing a council in special measures or overridden by the legal process. But in health, there is no such thing. Okay? So we should be able to do something about it. So as I mentioned before, David joined us. Yes. We need to agree which English councils, which Senate seats, and which seats in the Scottish Parliament we're going to contest. The reason for that is we should try and leave our egos behind. We will find the best candidate possible for each seat, and we should identify the councils where collectively all 7 parties have the most members. There's no point, say, trying to fight a council endorsed when we have, say, 10 members and they can't even get a single ward under the control. So we've got to identify, we've got to concentrate our effort. Now, part of the agreement that Catherine and I reached when we were the first to sign this Belmont Accord was that we share intelligence, we share information on where our strengths are. And Russell was very kind. He collated information on where the weak seats were. Although we didn't actually put into practice, we still fielded 35 parliamentary candidates up and down the country. So we identify and prioritise issues according to public concerns. Now, because we're fighting local elections, there will be local issues. And a lot of people, unfortunately, think that health can't be a local issue, it's dictated from the House of Commons, but it isn't. Because with the 2022 Health and Care Act, we have the opportunity to do something about it. We need to set up teams. It's coming towards the end of November. 7th of May is not too far away. So we need to get hold of a team. We need to coordinate. So I think Brian, Catherine, Russell, I think there are very enthusiastic people in the room, and we'll start to coordinate, gather intelligence on where the weakest councils or the best places where we can contest, and start selecting candidates. And then we start campaigning. We have in the room Mr. Sid Pepper, who has kindly supported ADF up until this point, and he's also offered his help to support the Belmont group. So I think we're very grateful to Sid, who's not only given us support, he's actually physically here today to show his alignment with us. Now, when I went round Melton, or when I went round Bradford when I was doing a general election of 2005, it is not only a way to gather people interested in what you stand for, it also engages them, it makes them feel as if they are part of the political drive. So I think local fundraising not only help you with getting money into the war chest, but it also engages people who would then multiply your influence across the community. So local, please don't depend just on the central organisation. I think the good thing about Belmont is it's decentralised, and we will entrust the fundraising, the campaigning to all the groups in the different parts of the country. But as I say, while we do that, we must also remember we need to target from the outset. Instead of having our energies dissipated over a wide area, we must concentrate our efforts on winnable councils, winnable seats in the Senate, winnable seats in the Scottish Parliament. Now, I'll just take a brief run through and tell you why the health system has gone from bad to worse. When Thatcher came in, what she decided was there wasn't enough competition, not enough quality building efforts in the health service. So she started the general idea was to introduce the internal market. She started with compulsory competitive tendering. So for those services that were peripheral to the health service, the NHS, the delivery of the medical care, she thought the best thing is to have compulsory tendering, so we get the best caterers in, we get the best physiotherapists in, whatever it is. It aligned with the Griffiths report, which suggested that the NHS would be placed under managers. Now, before that, back in the 70s, when I first qualified, for example, there were hospital governors and board of governors. So when I was working in Sheffield, the Royal Hospital Sheffield had his own board of governors, a very tight team that looked after his affairs. But that was all changed when Thatcher came in. She wanted competitive tendering and the operation of health delivery by managers. Now, nowhere do you see the patient being put in the equation. It's all about we the politicians control the doctors, control the people. We think we know what the people want. We give it to them the way we see it. And that's very flawed. She decided that she would make groups of doctors compete for so-called business, but it's all internal, it's all based on your taxes. The idea was to control prescribing. Now, it's an antithesis of care, because if you start controlling costs, you have straight away introduced a negative element in taking care of people. As I always said in my public addresses over the years as a doctor, I'll give you whatever is best for you. It may be the cheapest, it may be the most expensive, but the ambition is to get you well again, make you productive again, contribute to the economy of the country, put food on the table for your family. Reduce hospital referrals. You know, there were doctors in my time who were specialized in whatever they did. For example, I went through registrar training in neurology, chest medicine. So I was able to deal with those things at a GP level, and only the very difficult cases in those specialties were referred. Now, reducing hospital referrals would work if all the doctors were equally competent, enthusiastic, and well trained. But if it was an incentive to say, look, if you save so much money, we'll give you so much money towards your practice, that becomes flawed, because the incentive then is not to keep up the excellence, but to actually keep the money back. So again, patients suffered. So although the idea was right, they didn't think through the consequences. Negotiating with providers was the core of getting quality, because in any business, you know, when you have competition, it drives up quality, it keeps down prices, and that was the basic tenet. But it didn't quite work. So then came Tony Blair. Now he started dividing up the NHS, which is an integral service throughout the United Kingdom, into NHS England, NHS Wales, and Rob will tell you what a hash they made of the job. NHS of Scotland, and then we have Health and Social Care of Northern Ireland. Alan Milburn in the early 2000s decided to be bold. So not only did they accelerate, the Labour Party accelerate the PFI, the Private Finance Initiative, they also signed services with the private sector. So they would decant long waiting lists onto the private sector to get things doing. In theory, that was very good. But unfortunately, it de-incentivized, it demoralized those doctors in the NHS, thinking that, well, if the work is going across to the private sector, there isn't a need for us to keep doing it. And what happened was a lot of consultants on part-time contract then drifted across to the private sector. He introduced what we call practice-based commissioning, where groups of doctors would hold funds. So it's a progression from Margaret Thatcher's GP fund holding. But it didn't work. I'll tell you why. Because there were doctors who were very entrepreneurial, doctors who were very practical, decided to challenge the model. In Leicestershire, I set up the Leicestershire Medical Chambers. It was like a bit of Noah's Ark. Well, we had 2 gynecologists, 2 cardiothoracic surgeons, 2 of virtually everything. But you know, Tim Rideout, the chief executive, said, Teck, your group is too big, too powerful, and too dominant. So it lay dormant in the company's house for 2 years, and then we just closed it down. Then came modernising medical careers. Now, the Labour government thought that previously the progression to consultant rank was a bit haphazard, and there was a bit of the old school system where if I knew your school or if I know your dad, I'll give you a position of being a consultant. But unfortunately, modernising medical careers came at a time when the EU was imposing working time directive on us. So that restricted the number of training places. It also reduces the exposure of trainees to intensive expertise building. And then we had an agenda for change where different groups of specialties underwent radical changes. For example, the agenda of for change was applied to nursing, to physiotherapy, and so on. And last but not least, they introduced something called the NHS Directive. Dial 111, you get to somebody trained to go by algorithm to decide where you should be directed. All these things, you never really talk to the patients about it. They decide, look, we're going to shield you away from unnecessary exposure to the people you need to see. Okay, you go through an organised system, and you get to see. But the thing, it doesn't work. Okay, the government should learn to trust the people more. Cameron with Andrew Lansley, he set up the Health and Social Care Act, which in fact distanced the Secretary of State from the performance of various elements of the health service. It unfortunately fell into disrepute and didn't do very much. And now we arrive in the COVID era. Now COVID caught a lot of people by surprise, caught me by surprise, because we thought, it wouldn't happen, but looking back now, we know that it's been in the planning for some time. There were various agendas being pursued under the COVID pandemic regulations. They were trying to do various things, as you probably know. They were trying to see how compliant the population would be. There are various evidence that a lot of people suffered, either in terms of getting short-term harms, long-term illnesses, and even deaths. I used to be a research registrar in Glasgow. I did a bit of immunology as part of the rheumatology. And I saw how the body's enzyme and what they were putting in the vaccine could actually lead to, by virtue of a reverse transcriptase enzyme, actually incorporate this RNA material into our genetic material and cause problems. So when the BBC announced that Lisa Shaw was certified to have died from COVID, why did they continue? There were more deaths, but why, to this day, are they still pushing the vaccine to their agendas? When I was doing research, when you had serious adverse incidents being reported, or even let alone a death, the drug trial would be stopped. This COVID vaccine still continues. And I wrote an article in the Daily Express in February of 2021. I said, look, we don't need to give our children. Jonathan Van Tam was proposing that we trial this in children. We don't need to trial it in children. Children don't get coronavirus illnesses, let alone suffer mortality. But he went ahead. I saw my first case of myocarditis in a teenager while working in A&E in Nottingham. A healthy boy getting short of breath, getting chest pain, playing football 2 weeks after his jab. That is unconscionable. So we have corruption of medical ethics. My own wife went for her COVID jab. I said, what did they tell you? Nothing, you'll be fine. And we get a bit of soreness. That is an informed consent. There wasn't informed consent because there were no proper trials conducted. There was not a list of things to tell people In fact, any procedure like that, when done in a clinical setting during my time, you tell people, look, we have a new product. You are invited to take part, or you can refuse. And if you refuse, your care will not be compromised. And if it's a treatment that you require, we'll find an alternative treatment. There was no such process being undertaken for people having the COVID jab. There was no informed consent because there was no data about what's right or wrong about it. And people were just pushed into having it. The doctors, I was very disappointed. The majority of them fell for it. They listened to the government, but didn't listen to those few people who were raising concerns. So people like Dr. Sam White was castigated and suspended. Dr. Muhammad Adil, and then latterly we have people like Dr. David Cartland. I just managed to duck and dive. Very difficult, very sad. I'm sure in this room there will be people who know of sufferers of the vaccine injury. At the same time, we find that access to doctors was being curtailed. So you had serious problems. If you think you had COVID, you couldn't even see the doctor. Take a few paracetamols, keep away, put a mask on, keep your social distance. The virus can only jump 1.9 meters, but not 2 meters. You'll be all right. But that's the suckers they take us to be. We treated as suckers. The whole health service was being dumbed down. There isn't a single practice I know now that has returned to normal levels of operation. You walk into a surgery, you don't see the chairs being occupied. You phone up for an appointment, you're in a queue. And if you're lucky, you get to see a clinical assistant, a nurse, and not a doctor.
Yeah, that's true.
That's very sad. And the Royal College has the temerity, that's just why I say multiple agendas, of issuing doctors the Royal College guidebook on how to be green. We train as doctors. We didn't train in climate manipulation. On climate, for example, there'll be people on the streets who don't think anything adverse to these streaks going across the skies. I didn't believe anything until I saw reports. And then I saw and observed how they were different from condensation trails. Chemical trails are not condensation trails. But these things are full of aluminium, strontium, and so on. They're toxic to us, but they're doing to us. So there are enough issues to engage with people, enlighten people on the streets to get you to win support, win your council seats, and eventually, at the next general election, if it was ever held, to get to the green benches. I think I've discussed quite a bit of this. I'll just go to strategy because I think strategy is very important. So we talked about how we are being abused. You know, this assisted dying bill, I think it's a travesty. I don't know whoever thought that they could actually get an assisted dying bill. I remember back in 2015, 2014-15, I stood up in the CCG meeting. I was a CCG board member. And there was a hush across the room. They said, Teck, don't say it. So I stood up and said, look, we are trained. We know when death is imminent. We don't need to put people on end-of-life care pathways. We don't need to over-sedate them. We just use our sense of compassion, our clinical skills, and manage the best we can. Do you know what? Why I stood up, they said, we will give doctors £100 a patient to fill in this 10-page document, end-of-life care pathway. We are trialing this to see how effective it is. That is subversion of medical ethics, subversion of professional integrity of the highest and worst order. The next one, the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty. It's very interesting. If there was a genuine virus affecting the world, spreading around, We don't need a treaty where we forego our sovereignty, our rights, our legislation. We share best practices. Yeah, so the clinicians can talk amongst themselves. With this sort of illness, with this sort of thing, we give this, we treat that. We do not need a treaty to deal with a real pandemic. Right. After hearing from Rob about how bad the Welsh are being treated in terms of health, I decided to look up, and sure enough, they have an awful lot of problems. Do you know, we spend huge amount of money. NHS England spends 200 billion. NHS for the whole of UK is 300 billion. I remember the time when Tony Blair came in, the Conservative government was spending 37 billion pounds. That's all. We now have nearly 10 times as much. And the service is certainly 10 times worse. Anybody dispute that? So we need to do something. We need to ensure that care standards are held up. And we want to bring back personal autonomy. People have got to be empowered. You should know the power is with them, not with the government. Don't delegate it to the government. And I'll tell you why things have gone wrong. The government taxed the people to pay the doctors to look after the patients. But what happens is, since Thatcher's time, the patients are neglected. They think, or you think, you're being looked after. The money is then used to pursue so-called policies in your interest. When you hear the word in your interest, always suspect. So what happens is, when I was a GP, when I first left hospital service to become a GP, 60 to 70% of my income was made up from capitation. The better I looked after people, the better my take-home pay would be. Towards the end, it was less than 20%, a mere 15%. And I had to give up because the health centre was being privatised, the rents kept going up, I had to pay for my staff pensions, I couldn't cope anymore, so I gave up my practice. Eventually it's now been sold to a private provider. Now, a year ago I decided to stay in touch, I've retired, to stay in touch to find out what the GP contract was. The first big GP contract came in 2004. The first thing I noticed was a YouTube discussion between two doctors, how to maximize your income. I thought the doctor's role was not to maximize income. We all need money to live, but we got into the vocation to care for people. Okay? So it shows how distorted things have become. From 60% based on capitation to mere 20%. So the rest are made up in targets. So if you had so many people coaxed into stopping cigarette cessation, you were given so many pounds. I remember they were dangling 50 pence per patient to convert from a more expensive statin to a cheaper statin. The doctors have lost it. They have been bribed, they have been captured. So what we need to do is to take that equation away and reconnect doctors with patients. And this is how we do it. This is from the local government association. I think you might be a member. As a councillor.
I was in the past.
Yes. So what it is they say with this funding going towards more and more local determination, we should be able to improve care and care services. Unfortunately, the bulk of the money going to councils is actually spent in health promotion. Vague things like, please don't smoke, please don't do this, don't do that, exercise more. Nothing about, for example, if you want to promote health that makes sense, what you is you improve your medical services, treat people early with the best treatment, get them back to become economically productive. Not telling all sorts of waffle that they know themselves. So in this chart, which I got from King's Fund, I think, it shows that 30% of the budget is actually in woolly things. schools, voluntary services, social care. That should be actually taken out of the budget. Social care should never be part of health and social care. Now, having seen what's happening in Wales, that Rob drew my attention, there's a lot of political incompetence, and certainly in Wales there's a cohort of old school physicians and nurses saying we want to come out. Even in Leicester, for example, I had people come and retired consultants say, I want to do my bit to help, if you can organise something. And we can. Now Richard Taylor is a very interesting chap, okay? Recently retired at the time. And what the Labour government was planning to do was to move Kidderminster Hospital acute services, including the A&E, to Worcester, 18 miles away. So the residents of Kidderminster, and certainly a lot of staff in Kidderminster, were very concerned about the decimation of the services. So this was a snapshot of when Tony Blair came to power. So David Locke had a majority of 6,900, very healthy majority, grabbed the seat from the Conservative. But Kidderminster Hospital Group had one issue. They wanted to retain A&E, they wanted to serve the population, and this is where I think local issues are so important. So Richard Taylor came in, and he had a whopping 17,000 majority, a huge swing. And he kept the seat for 2 more terms.
Okay, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Based on that, I noticed there's no Liberal Democrat. Did they actually work with Richard Taylor in order to help him get elected? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know that one, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just because they're not there.
Could be, yes. Yes.
Just wondered.
So that's an example of galvanizing the public behind a very hot issue. I know that's virtually a single issue election, but if you can get support behind you on a few key issues, things that you can actually make a change, then you find support. Now, how do we do it? We win control of the council, as I mentioned, for example, in Nottinghamshire, 66 seats. We don't need to win all 60 or 66 of them. We just need to win the majority and keep pushing what we need to do. We exercise the mandate of the people. We have the people behind us. And we reconfigure the services. I showed the King's Fund diagram. We will, if the people are having difficulty getting to the GPs, we will set aside so-called health promotion funding to employ doctors that will actually serve that need. We will strengthen the relationship between the council and the doctors. So, at the moment, I mean, the latest should include a reform group now because they want a few councils. But what I'd like to see is Belmont doing that. The Belmont group. So, that's a hope, and that should be our ambition. So, without much ado, I've occupied enough time. I'm happy to answer any questions. I've taken the liberty of making this slightly longer because, as I say, Paul is unable to join us today because of his family bereavement. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I hope it has given you some encouragement, and even though I'm retired, I'm happy to, as Ken would say, be in the backseat to give you support. Thank you very much.